Bolton and Spettigue for this afternoon's meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. If we can have confirmation of the minutes, please, on page 1. Through to page 5. Is everybody happy with those minutes?
Yeah, it's Lucy here. I'm happy.
Yeah. A seconder, please.
I'm happy to second that. Councillor Kimber.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. Everyone in favour? None to the contrary?
Nobody typing to the contrary, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, declarations of interest. If members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. So if we move on to item 4, items requiring urgent attention. I have one item that's requiring urgent attention that I'm going to ask Mr. Chris Brooke to come on the line and join us with an update of the cycle route Tavistock to Plymouth along the A386 corridor, please, Mr. Brooke.
Thank you, Councillor Ewings. Afternoon, members. Yes, absolutely right. So you'll have seen in the members' bulletin last week, put in a little bit of information there which reflected just the outcome of that week's work. So we asked Sustrans to do a study into that corridor, and they had started to do some preliminary work. But in actual fact, Devon have also commissioned a study into that corridor, so that's good news. So we managed to call a meeting with the Devon County Council, Dartmoor National Park, Sustrans and Southampton West Devon, and we're all sat in the same room, and we ran through a study that was pulled together by WSP, which is a consultant, which is an option study and looks at the feasibility, really early, high-level feasibility of what could and couldn't work, and that's really reflects the update that I put in the members' bulletin. So it's ongoing, and it's very positive, and I think anything we can do as a council to keep that positivity moving forward will be very welcome. But I'm happy to take any questions if that's appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brooke. Councillor Wood, please.
Oh, hi, Mr. Brooks. Thank you for that update, and thanks for putting that in the bulletin. I'm obviously a ward member in Buckland-Monacorum for that area, and I had no idea that any of these meetings were happening. Can we have some assurance, please, that we're going to be sort of kept in the loop and kept up to date with anything that's going on with this, please? Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you know as much as every other councillor. Yes, you have my assurances. I would say that the fact that there is a study that's being commissioned was news to me too. So it's not that we've commissioned a huge great report and I'm busy having meetings all over the place looking at detail, because that's just not the case. So yeah, apologies. Obviously, you know as much as everybody else at this point, but as the ward member, we can have a separate conversation about this anytime you like.
Thanks, Mr. Brooks. That would be great. Thank you.
Councillor Hayworth, please. Councillor Hayworth. Okay, Councillor Daniel, please.
Oh, hello. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, I'm very pleased to say that, or to hear that we are getting some progress on the cycleway between Tavistock and Plymouth. And I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that there are 2 potential projects on the other side of West Devon. I'm really thinking that we now as a council need to set up some sort of working group to look at this, because if you get a lot of piecemeal cycle tracks that don't join up, it will be sort of a waste of effort, and I'd like to see a bit more vision about how we go about this. And has Chris got any ideas? Thank you.
Madam Chairman, if I can respond. Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Yeah, isn't it fantastic that we've gone from having no new cycle routes to having lots of things to talk about? I think it's great news, and as a result, I agree. I do think we need a forum whereby this is discussed. But actually, we have the best opportunity available to us in the form of the corporate strategy, which is a place-based plan for West Devon. And I think that is ultimately the right place to have the high-level ambition that this council holds for active travel and cycle networks in it, in the same way that, if you like, Dartmoor National Park consulted on theirs recently, which included their ambition to connect their communities together. Clearly, connectivity, both physically and through broadband, are high priorities for West Devon. So I totally agree, and the corporate strategy is the place that's the hook I think we need as a council to hang these projects off. And the timeline of the corporate strategy, of course, is very quick, insofar as it's an action between now and the summer. So I think that's the formal route to making sure that it gets the priority it needs and having that place-based strategy. And there are, and obviously it absolutely needs to be front, foremost and owned by the members. So, and then separately alongside that, I think you're right. There's probably some informal conversations we need to have, and I'm happy to have that to pick that up with you. There's also the interface between all of the cycle lobby groups and the public sector delivery authorities. Bearing in mind that the public sector delivery authority here is actually Devon County Council. So it's not something we can do in isolation. It's absolutely right and proper that Devon County Council, who will ultimately probably build these things and fund most of them, are linked in with all of this conversation. So, Councillor Daniel, perhaps we can have a conversation about this offline, but my response really initially is that the corporate strategy is the right place for these conversations.
Thank you.
Councillor Hayworth, are you there yet? I know she's having some connection problems. So, Councillor Cheadle, would you like to ask your question?
Well, it's really just supplementary to the comments that Chris Brooke just gave. At the Joint Local Plan AGM, this was briefly mentioned, and I know that there's a desire within South Hams Council also to form some sort of cycle route discussion group, so that we, as Lynn was saying, we sort of join the ends up, if I can put it that way. So I think I agree entirely it should be in our corporate plan, but perhaps in addition to that, we might benefit from a more inclusive group between ourselves, Plymouth and South Hams, to make sure that, as I say, the ends of the cycle tracks join up.
I was at the JLP meeting and took note of the names, and that we should be able to make contact, because there was a councillor in South Hams and one on Plymouth City, but that expressed the view, so we could work with them together according to how we put things in the corporate strategy to move forward as a council. And I'm sure Councillor Hayworth's question would have been exactly the same, Mr. Brooke, about the link that's going through Chagford, etc. Oh, she's here. So is she able to join us now?
I hope. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Nikki.
Oh, Vril, thanks so much. Sorry to be in a tangle with the technology. I was just wondering, Chris, it's all terribly encouraging, and congratulations on the progress being made on the other side of the moor. It's just brilliant. I was just hoping for a bit of work on, DEFRA is actually working, doing exploratory planning on how to use the ELMS money, which means that it seems to me we've got the possibility for funding there, so that we could actually do some real progress across the piece, as opposed to having all these trails waiting in a sort of hopeless line. I'm just hoping that we could make some kind of combined approach to DEFRA, to say, right, we're here. We have all our residents want these, our councillors, our officers. We all want the same thing to happen. We could just make a huge step forward if we can get that funding as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayworth. Yeah, so I completely agree. I fully 100% support this. It needs to have a strategy around it, which is why I believe it needs to be in our corporate strategy. And it needs to be just because we have a boundary. Cycling doesn't have a boundary. West Devon, people don't stop their bikes at the boundary, so it needs to be Devon wide, and of course it needs to be peninsula wide through the LEP as well.
Well, I think UK wide myself.
Well, yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. You're completely right. And this is where it gets a bit tricky, doesn't it? Because in reality, we've got so many different public sector partners. So we've got Sustrans, who rightly are, really important to be central to the conversation. Dartmoor National Park, West Devon, Plymouth, South Hams, Teambridge to the east, North Devon. We've got them all there, and Devon County Council are very central to all of that. So I fully agree, and I really support this conversation. It is about joining it up and gluing it in. Let's get the hooks into our corporate strategy, because there are difficult decisions to be made. There is limited budget and far more aspiration for cycle lane delivery than there.
Well, that's the point about the DEFRA, applying to DEFRA in a really sensible, forceful way right now, while they're doshing out the money or working out how to dosh it out.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think you probably know more about that funding than I do at this stage, so it's quite hard for me to comment because you're very well informed on it. So perhaps we can pick that up, and I need to be clear on who the right public body is to make that application. Probably Devon, but I don't know. We've got the contacts at officer level within Devon County Council, and I'm happy to use them to our advantage to try and bring forward these, hopefully, quite strategic cycle routes that will make a big difference looking into the future. So yeah, lots of opportunities.
Jill, lovely. Well, I will tell you everything I know, Chris. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp, you have a question, please.
Yes, I do. And I think perhaps I'm throwing I'm not a cricket player, but I think it's a googly into the pitch, because a while ago when we were talking about green transport across the region, cycle routes were planned. Well, no, they weren't. They were envisaged next to perhaps electric a substitution for trains, so that there could be this larger scale contact between Plymouth and Tavistock and Oakhampton. Now, very rightly, everybody's been saying, oh, there's just a limited pot to pull out of, but my thought is that we should be thinking about that kind of large scale contact and how we can accommodate both cyclists and this bigger picture of green transport. I don't think that's a question. I think that's just me just throwing something rather larger scale into the picture.
Madam Chairman, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Mr. Brooke, forgot to turn the microphone on. Would you like to comment or just leave it as a statement from Councillor Kemp?
I think it's a very positive aspiration and a good statement, well made.
Good. Councillor Sellis, please.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Have the members of the O&S committee and fellow councillors looked at Devon County Council's information about cycling, and all the interactive cycle maps and the trails, etc., because Devon County has some of the, I think, one of the highest councils for cycle routes and everything, and it certainly fits with the clean green agenda and active travel. And that I was just wondering, there's discussions going on certainly in Tavistock with the active travel, and we've been working with Transition Tavistock and the county officer in charge of that, with responsibility for that, rather. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Right, if everybody's finished with that, Mr. Brooke, could we, oh, sorry, Councillor Coulson has his hand up. Oh yes, there is a hand. I didn't look at who it was, sorry.
No,
too many technical things here.
It's just a quick
Thank
one.
you, Councillor Coulson.
Yeah, so just a quick one. For Chris, the mechanism, sorry, for us to I think we all want the same thing effectively, and it's something, we're not talking about just a leisure activity here. I think with the advent of e-bikes and up to 50-mile ranges on some of those things, e-bikes especially could be a very real alternative form of commuting, and particularly A386, but the whole of Route 27, to be honest. But with the increasing development in the town, the number of people working down in Plymouth, we should be considering this alongside as much as bus routes, car transport, rail transport. So what's the mechanism for getting all this into the corporate strategy? And apologies if I maybe should know that already, but
no, not at all. No. Is Drew on the call? Because I want to get this right, and if he is, he will be very eloquent in setting out the process.
And Chairman, I am on the call. It's Drew here.
Sorry, Drew, to drop you in on it, but I don't want to give the wrong answer to Councillor Coulson on the engagement process from the members' perspective.
No problem at all. If the chair's happy, I'll just explain that.
I'm certainly happy, Mr. Powell.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're obviously at the early stage of gathering all the information for the development of the corporate strategy. So at this stage, I would just suggest members with any thoughts about key areas, key projects, plans, schemes, themes, whatever they want that they consider would be important to include within the umbrella of the corporate strategy, to email them in to myself and Mr. Hawke. Because, as I say, at the moment we're developing the broad umbrella for the strategy, and we'll be working with the wider membership on that in the future. So really, at the moment, no idea is a bad idea. Put it forward and we'll capture it in the way we can. A lot of the issues that have been discussed so far are already captured in the climate change and biodiversity strategy, which sets out around active travel and so on. But we'll obviously be incorporating that within the new framework of the corporate strategy. So I hope that helps.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Thank you, Councillor Coulson. Right, is everybody happy if we move on now to item 5, public forum? Mr. White, wherever you've gone.
I'm here, Chair. We've had no questions raised under the forum.
Okay, thank you. If we move to item 6, the Hub Committee Forward Plan. If any members have had any questions about that, have we, Mr. White?
We've received no prior notification, Chair, on the forward plan.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions on the programme between pages 10 and 12 of your agenda, please? I think the one we could mention is the dog control orders one. Hopefully this time it will cover a bit more of what we hoped it would cover previously, and we can look at that from the next hub meeting. So no questions on there. So if we could move to the leisure contract, the Fusion annual report for 2020 on pages 13 to 34 of your agenda. And I believe we have Mr. Greg Holland and Mr. Steve Rose on the line.
Good afternoon, Chair. It's Greg Holland here, and Steve Rose is on the line. Thank you.
Hello, Greg. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well, Chair.
Right. Would you like to give your presentation, Greg, on how we're doing and how we're not doing and all those sorts of things? Do you want to take questions at the end or as we're going, or how would you like to do it? Or should we do it section by section?
I think if we could take questions at the end, but again, if people have got questions throughout, then I'm more than happy to do that as well. So thank you.
Okay, Greg, off you go.
Thank you very much.
I don't know whether Daryl's doing a screen or how you're working that, but
yeah, if I could just go on to the agenda slide 2, Daryl, please, if that's okay. Thank you. Thank you. So just firstly, good afternoon. As Councillor Ewing has stated, my name is Greg Holland, the Regional Business Manager for Fusion Lifestyle. My colleague Steve Rose is on the call as well, the Business Development Manager for Fusion Lifestyle. Just as an overview, obviously this is the agenda slide, some of the key items we'd like to take you through this afternoon. But prior to taking you through the presentation, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you for all of your help and support through 2020 and moving into 2021 to enable us to look at reopening the sites and operating the leisure facilities in West Devon. Obviously, the presentation that I'm going to go through today is slightly different to the normal annual reviews because of the unprecedented period that we've all experienced, and it's aimed to provide you with an overview of our journey through lockdown 1 in March 2020, or from March 2020 through to looking at reopening in April in 2021 following the government's announcement last week. If I could just go on to slide 3, please, Darryl. Thank you. So, as you can see, as the pandemic took hold in February and March in 2020, and following the government's announcement and decision to move into a national lockdown and close all of the leisure facilities, Fusion worked extremely closely and in partnership with council officers to mitigate any and all impact to leisure where we could. However, due to the national lockdown in March, we closed all of the facilities in West Devon, and essentially the funding we received from West Devon Council for the ongoing maintenance and asset protection and for the reopening of facilities was split into essentially 2 time periods. These were April 2020 to September 2020, which essentially was short-term funding to support the mothballing of the facilities as they closed, asset protection, maintenance protection, but also looking forward to reopening in July and August. And subsequently, October 2020 to March 2021, which was longer-term funding and ran in line with internal council approvals, which went from October to March. But again, it's important to note that the financial projections that we provided, that we'll talk about through the presentation, actually only looked at the impact of lockdown 1 and the reopening from lockdown 1. It never incorporated lockdown 2, November 2020, or the start of lockdown 3, which commenced from late December or early January onwards. If I could just go to slide 4, please. So moving forward.
Right, can I just ask a moment?
Sorry.
Councillor Daniel can't see the slides. Mr. White, is there something she should be doing? But also, Councillor Daniel, the slides were within the agenda, which you could look at on ModGov or the actual council website. If you'd like to continue, Greg, I think that should be fine.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor. So just on slide 4, there were a number of items in March 2020 that we looked at when we closed the facilities. We undertook a hard closure. So what do I mean by a hard closure? Essentially, it was a systematic controlled lockdown and close down of all of the plant and air handling units within the leisure centres. We switched off all of the boilers or reduced them to a minimal level to ensure that there was some form of heating going through the system. Regular weekly building and monitoring checks were completed by qualified FM engineers and technicians. We reduced our planned preventative maintenance to reduce our cost base, but to ensure that we maintained our insurance obligations. But we also had to ensure that we reduced our utility cost because we had to reduce our cost base through essential items like this, because the centres were going to be closed for a longer period of time. What we also did, we looked at online bookings to ensure that we could track and trace and follow the government's track and trace system on reopening. We operated one-way systems throughout the leisure centres. We introduced hand sanitisation, new marketing and promotional material to go around the centres to help customers wayfinding and signage. High touch point cleaning checks were introduced every 2 hours by our dedicated cleaners within the centres, and they were recorded on our central F360 standards and compliance audits. And obviously we introduced the mandatory wearing of face coverings as well throughout that period. If I could just go on to slide 5 as well, please, Darryl. So I won't actually go through the essential point because I'm sure you're all aware of when the areas reopened, but obviously Meadowlands opened with a dry side offering in October, and then we reopened the swimming pool, which quickly followed by the re-emergence of the swim school on the 2nd of November, and obviously Parklands Leisure Centre opened on the 17th of August. If we could go on to slide 6, please. I think slide 6 is a very important slide to touch on because it illustrates very succinctly the fantastic work that the central and frontline operational teams at Fusion undertook to either undertook either during or during the closures or upon reopening to facilitate the COVID-19 secure facilities and provide confidence, more importantly, to the local communities that our leisure centres were safe for them to access and enjoy. All of the risk assessments were based upon government guidance supported by Public Health England recommendations, and also with all important updates from our trade industry body UK Active and all key national governing bodies such as Swim England. We, as I've stated before, we introduced high touch point checks to ensure that our facilities were safe, such as doors, turnstiles, and other important touchpoint areas within the leisure centres. All of our frontline and central support staff undertook newly created online training, which was developed in-house, that has now been successfully accredited to CIMSPA, the Chartered Institute of Management for Sport and Physical Activity, which is a great success, and all of them receive industry recognition and accreditation for that training. If we could just go on to slide 7, please. So in terms of slide 7, the key difference between lockdown 1 in March, which was lockdown 1, and lockdown 2 in November, was that we completed a soft closure of facilities in November, as we knew that the leisure centres were only going to be closed for a short period of time and not several months like lockdown 1, or now we know about lockdown 3. It enabled us as an organisation to move quite dynamically and remobilise and reopen the leisure centres as quickly as we could once we were allowed to do so. A soft closure is essentially not turning things off, but actually turning things down, such as swimming pool water temperatures, air temperatures around the building, and ensuring that we can bring our staff back, re-educate them, retrain them, and prepare the sites a lot more quickly than we could in either lockdown 1 or lockdown 3. In terms of customer communication, we definitely learnt as an organisation from lockdown 1, when we originally closed, that we needed to engage more closely with our customers and our local communities to ensure that we were updated more regularly, and to ensure that we were aware, or they were aware, sorry, of when we could reopen, but also to respond to them more quickly if they had a question or complaint, whether this be through telephone, social media or email. So to ensure we did this, we did 2 things. We updated and provided a comprehensive and updated customer comms plan, which was shared with all local authorities, which covered social media, emails, all push applications and notifications through our digital application. And we also introduced a customer service team, essentially made up of our regional customer service managers, which spanned a 7-day-a-week operation, and all of the inquiries, no matter what forum, whether it's social media, email or telephone, were responded to within 24 hours, because we were fully aware of how important it was to respond following feedback from lockdown 1. If I could go on to slide 8, please. So moving on to what we would class as lockdown 3 from late December, early January. Again, essentially, we reverted back to lockdown 1. We knew that the lockdown was going to be a lot longer, for several months. So we completed a hard closure. We switched things off. We placed all of our staff on furlough. We communicated with all of our local authority partners and all of our customers, more importantly, and we provided detailed demobilisation plans. So by demobilisation, I mean that we have very detailed plans now to essentially how we communicate with our staff, our customers. We shut down our facilities. We prepare them for the months that they'll be closed, to ensure that we cover off every important detail, to ensure the buildings are shut down safely, but also that we can open them up as quickly as possible once we're allowed to do so. What we also did is we continued the online group exercise offering, Fusion at Home and Les Mills On Demand, which we provided an opportunity for people to access, and I'll update you on how that's performing and what we've done to improve that service a little further now. There was also the continuation of the customer contact centre. We were provided very good feedback from local authority partners and customers alike about the contact they had with our staff to ensure that they had a timely response. So that was continued throughout that period. If I can go to slide 9, please, Darryl. So as you're all aware, based upon the conditions that presented themselves to us as an organisation and similar to other leisure operators and business operators with the pandemic, We undertook a comprehensive review of our staffing structures because this was linked to our inability to trade normally and generate normal contractual revenue. We undertook a redundancy progress which commenced in early July 2020 and it was concluded in November 2020. The key roles that were affected were team leaders. It wasn't several people classed as team leaders. It was the entire role of team leaders that were actually affected and were made redundant, and people were provided alternative employment or the opportunity for alternative employment, and all catering staff because of footfall and the inability to generate revenue because footfall was low. And no revenue coming into our catering outlets because they would be closed because of the footfall that we projected. We kept them closed, and unfortunately that area or staff designation was affected through this period. Overall, there were 150 permanent headcounts staff prior to the pandemic. The current permanent staff headcount is 129. 120 positions were retained, but overall 37 positions were made redundant. So that isn't 37 individuals. It may be one person that has 2 or 3 separate roles that make up the number of 37. What we found, again, like other leisure operators and local businesses, there were a high number of staff that actually resigned from their roles because furlough actually gave them the opportunity during the building closure to identify new roles or undertake training that they'd always wanted to do, and this provided them an opportunity to do it. So the actual net effect wasn't as great as we thought it would be at the start of the process when we eventually got to the end of the process itself. If I could go on to slide 10, please. So this slide is about participation from August through to December 2020. As you all have seen from the earlier slides, we reopened the facilities in a phased approach. So each of the leisure centres showed growth as they reopened. Excuse me, and it increased through August, but obviously dropped off in November when we went into lockdown 2, and then obviously increased and incrementally rose again in December. An interesting point to note that actually the participation dropped year on year. So in October, there was just over around 10,000 participation between Meadowlands and Parklands, but actually that dropped to just over 5,000. So the usage between 2019 and 2020, the net effect was around 50%. So participation dropped by 50% between 2019 October and 2020 October. Just some information to pass on so that you can understand the impact on participation in that particular month. If we could go on to slide 11, please, Darryl. Thank you. So just before we go through any of the main financial information, again, going back to the start of the presentation, the financial projections that we supplied to West Devon and senior officers covered the period of April 20 to March 2021, and these were based upon information and research undertaken by our trade industry body, UK Active. Essentially, the projections were based upon the participation in August 2020 at starting at 40% of 2019 figures and recovering to about 80% in March 2021. As I alluded to earlier, the funding was split into 2 segments: short-term funding between August and September, and longer-term funding from October to March. What these projections focused upon was purely around the impact of lockdown 1 and the reopening of facilities between April and July. What it didn't include was the impact of lockdown 2 or lockdown 3. What it enabled us to do as an organisation was it included a full corporate review of centre and head office staffing and operating costs to ensure we had business sustainability. In terms of the client accounts, from August through to December, the financial performance for West Devon showed a small surplus of £61,000. Moving on to slide 12, please. Essentially, in terms of membership information, I have it as a whole for South Hams and West Devon. I haven't got it split down, but I can get that information for you if anyone would like that. Essentially, we took the numbers from February 2020, and then we took current figures from the end of January. In February 2020, across South Hams and West Devon, we had 6,764 monthly direct debit members, and at the end of January, we had 2,922. So there's a reduction of over 3,842. So essentially, over 50% drop off from the end of February pre-pandemic to the end of January this year. Moving on to the swim school information, slide 13, please. Again, in February 2020, we had 2,427 swim school pupils across South Hams and West Devon. We currently have just over 1,700 with a reduction of 726. So we've actually retained more swim school pupils than we have health and fitness members, but we believe that there will be a quicker increase in swim school numbers, because actually one of the safest places to be and exercise is in a pool of chlorinated water, because it's actually proven that there is a very, very low chance, if any at all, of actually catching COVID in chlorinated water. If you could move forward to slide 14, please. Okay, this just provides an overview of how we look moving forwards. So the operational measures will be similar to lockdown 1 and 2 were reintroduced for lockdown 3. Reopening leisure centres, we thought we were going to be in a tiered approach, and I must apologise, this was concluded prior to the government announcement on Monday. We will be going obviously into the key phases, so March the 8th, we can welcome back schools in any dual use agreements that we may have, such as parklands. April the 12th, indoor facilities, either individually or as a family, can be undertaken from April the 12th. Indoor group exercise programs can reopen on May the 17th, and then subject to government guidance and allowance, we can revert to a normal, a near normal, I should say, from the end of June, as long as everything goes to plan. We will continue to ensure that our customer and client communication is consistent and updated. We recently launched on the 22nd of February a change to our Fusion at Home online group exercise platform, where we've actually fully launched Fusion on Demand, which provides current members and pay and play members who are on their subscriptions free access to over 400 group exercise classes free per week. Now that is a free offer that Fusion have launched from the 22nd of February, and that will be free for all people up until the time that we reopen our facilities. We're in the final throes of concluding our planning for reopening, and we aim to have that information to senior officers later this week with updated financial projections as well. Lastly, slide 15, just to provide everyone an update. Fusion was successful in the submission and application for the Corona Large Business Interruption Loan, CBILS. It was aimed to provide short-term and long-term security, but based significantly around lockdown 1 and the impact of it. At the time we applied for it and we gained it, we didn't know that we were going into lockdown 2 or 3. I'm sure you've been updated, but we recently submitted an application for the National Leisure Recovery Funding application to support England. West Devon had an allocation of funding for both centres of £80,000, which covered a period of December 2020 to March 2021. We hope to have an imminent answer on our successful application. I do know that that is in the process of being done, and we hope to have feedback on that very shortly. Financial projections, like I said on the slide prior to this, we're providing a new set of financial projections to senior officers based upon the reopening of leisure facilities imminently, and we will be meeting hopefully next week to discuss that and the reopening of the facilities, so we can confirm that to yourselves and obviously customers as well. And we'll be undertaking a pricing review as part of that, subject to the actual annual overview and strategy. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you. Much easier when you could just press a screen. You can't do that anymore. Thank you very much indeed for that, Greg. It was a really interesting presentation and went through basically the last year through COVID. So really well done for that. Councillor Cheadle, please, you have the first question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. I just wondered if you've done any market testing on what the likely take-up of returning customers will be once the lockdown restrictions are lifted. I anticipate there'll still be some nervousness out there in the community about getting together with other people and what have you. And I just wondered if, if you've done any market testing to see what the folk that normally use the leisure centres think about coming back to use them.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Within the presentation, I mentioned that we had relied upon invaluable research undertaken by UK Active. We were hoping to have provided senior officers with our reopening plans and financial projections last week. However, we were made aware that UK Active, who we've been working closely with, as they have with all other leisure operators, were going to announce and present updated usage projections on what they thought usage across all leisure centres would look like as we reopened in April. So we are imminently awaiting the release of that so that we can ensure that any plans or projections are fully accurate and transparent when we send them across. We haven't done any localised testing at the moment. We did do some customer surveys in the first lockdown. We haven't redone those, but what we do know is that the capacities and usage information UK Active did from the first lockdown for the reopening were fairly accurate, and that's one of the key reasons why we're waiting on them this time.
Thanks very much. That wasn't my dog.
Sorry, it's mine. Are there any other questions for Greg, please? Wow. Got off lightly this year, haven't you, Greg? Oh, Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Greg, for a very interesting presentation. And I just wanted to ask, given that what you've been through and how you've managed with the process of restructuring loans and grants, do you think now that the future's fairly safe for the leisure centre, as far as you can tell? Our West Devon leisure centres that we value so much.
I think everyone has learnt a lot, because I think even in January 2020, no one expected the COVID, when it was reported in China, to have such a significant impact in this country or across the world. I significantly think and I hope that this is the last lockdown. I really do. But what I've learnt through this process as a leisure operator, when we locked down in the first instance, I didn't expect a second or a third lockdown. So whilst I think this will be the last time, I hope, fingers crossed.
Yes.
I do believe that we've had a successful partnership, and I'm a great believer in working in partnership with senior officers, and again thanking you for all of your support to ensure that we can reopen these facilities and they stay open. I do believe that we will need to work very closely together in the coming months to ensure that we reopen them successfully, they can be sustainable, and we can ensure that, more importantly, they're open for the local communities, because they are warranted to be open.
Thank you.
Councillor Yelland, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Holland, in your report, you did actually refer to, sadly, 37 roles being redundant, but you didn't actually say how many people individuals have needed to leave the organisation, or have the majority been able to be redeployed. It's actual numbers of people who've left. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Yen, thank you. Good point. Again, like they were 37 positions, I believe, and I can confirm this, and I can confirm it to officers who can confirm it across to you. That it was a smaller number than expected, but it was around 11 people in total. So 11 people rather than individual positions.
And is that over the whole geographical area, or is that within the West Devon area?
Across the whole geographical, South Hams and West Devon.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cheadle, I will oblige.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. We haven't talked about finance specifically, and I don't want to talk in numerical terms now about finance. But clearly there's going to be a need for Fusion to sit down with West Devon and others and sort of talk about the balance sheet, if I can put it that way. What do you anticipate the timetable for those events would be?
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. I mentioned very briefly that we were hoping to have finalised and sent across to senior officers our reopening plans and financial projections. There were three key pieces of information that we were waiting on. Firstly, the updated information from UK Active. We believe also that there's an announcement from Sport England around longer term funding from April onwards, which we hopefully will be this week. And obviously the budget announcement tomorrow from the Chancellor, which we hope to have finalise our projections and send them across. And once we have that, we hope to be in a position where we can work in partnership and discuss that with senior officers later this week or early next week.
Oh, thank you very much.
Chairman, would it be possible for me just to add a bit of information for your benefit at this point?
You certainly may, Mr. Brooke.
Thank you, and Greg, sorry, apologies for interrupting you. Just to say that in the diary, looking ahead, we've got an informal members briefing with South Hams and West Devon to discuss the finance side of things. So it should be in all your diaries. Keep an eye out for that in a few weeks' time. Assuming that is that we know the position from the budget and we know where we've got to, but the aspiration is to have got to that point, and then we can have that discussion. That's all.
Okay, I think it's the 16th of March, isn't it, Mr. Brooke?
That sounds familiar. I will just double check.
I'm just double checking myself.
The Ides of March.
It's the 18th of March, actually, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Molyneux.
Yeah, that's right, at 3:15 in the afternoon.
Oh, a Thursday to accommodate South Hams, I see.
Last one was a Tuesday, Chairman.
Worth a go. Right. Does anybody have any questions for Greg before we let him disappear off the call? No? Okay, Greg, thank you very much indeed for this presentation that you've given. That's very interesting. As you know, we will be working with you further throughout the situation we're in, and we will hopefully hear from you in good time. I just wish Fusion well and hope that the reopening of the pools and the facilities goes as well as possible, and hopefully lots of new members join. Thank you very much for your time, and to Mr. Rose, and I'm sorry we've not spoken or met, so thank you.
Thank you for all of your time, and thank you for all of your support. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Bye.
Bye.
Right, members, if we could move on to item 8, which is a verbal update from the Rural Broadband Working Group. Councillor Cheadle, please.
Thank you, Chair. A very quick a verbal update. I've spoken before about West Devon acquiring a sort of broadband officer, if I can put it that way, shared with South Hams. The post is being advertised for. I think this is the final week of that, so hopefully a suitable candidate will be chosen and deployed before too long. Also this week, Sydenham Damerel have signed their community fibre partnership agreement with BT Openreach, This is one which you might recall we have a part to play in, because there is a requirement to underwrite the legal framework with BT Openreach, and Sidney Damerel have worked with us to provide that underwriting. And we're very much looking at that as a sort of pilot project. Should other community fibre partnerships come along and need that sort of support, then the Sydenham Damerel experience will be a one on which we'll model that. So that's a project that's definitely going somewhere, and well worth others that are thinking about improving the broadband in their area to have a look at. And there are links available from that project should other people need assistance getting theirs off the ground. Thirdly, Connecting Devon and Somerset have let contracts with Airband to provide fixed fibre from Airband hubs. And we know that there's work in areas of West Devon where that activity is now going on. So that's one other thing just to keep an eye on. I don't think anyone's actually been connected that way yet, but there are certainly surveys and engineering work going on associated with it. And finally, a couple of us met up with Geoffrey Cox, our MP, the other day, and broadband was high on our list of things we wanted to talk to him about. We updated him on what we were up to. He was very interested, asked for some more information, which we've given him, and said that he would do what he could to sort of generally assist. He certainly understood the importance of broadband in a very rural environment. So that's the update for now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cheadle. Does anybody have any questions, Councillor Cheadle, please? No, then we'll move on to item 9, which is, did somebody say something? No. To item 9, which is task and finish group updates. Little a, the engagement and consultation concluding report, which is led by Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this is my last session today. Yes, this is some work which kicked off as part of the recovery plan. We've had 5 or 6 meetings of the task and finish group and have now completed our work. And the strategy has been put together with Mr. Hawke's assistance and others. And there's a copy of it for members to have a look at. I'll draw your attention perhaps to 3 parts of it. The first is a framework, almost a sort of grid, if you like, in the middle of the strategy, which outlines the various forms of engagement and consultation that the council can embark on when making changes to what we do. And I think that will be a very useful addition. Secondly, buried in the small print, as it were, is that when any new piece of work comes in front of the council for approval, there will be a standing item within the paper outlining what the engagement and consultation format for that particular piece of work will be. And that format will have been chosen from the table I've just mentioned. And finally, in the strategy is an action plan with dates and specific items that need to be done by those dates. So that's the strategy in a nutshell. The next step will be for this committee, obviously, to comment on it, and then for it to go to the hub for endorsement, and then on to council for endorsement. But I'm very happy to take questions on it as it is at the moment.
Thank you for that, Councillor Cheadle. Does anybody have any questions, Councillor Cheadle? I have to say it's a brilliantly set out document, Councillor Cheadle, and very easy to read. And I should imagine very useful as we go forward. You have no questions, Councillor Cheadle, so that is you done for a little while.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so if we move on to item 9.
Sorry, Chair, before we do move on, there is a recommendation on the screens.
Oh yes, there was. Sorry. Yes, the recommendation of the group. Just let me go back. Is that we note the work of the consultation, engagement, task and finish group, and endorse the draft community consultation and engagement strategy. And 3, recommend that the hub committee consider and recommend the strategy to council for adoption. I would like to propose that recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that. I second that, Mrs. Chairman or Miss Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. All those in favour, and if not, please type now, please.
Just giving it a second, Chair, but I can't see anyone typing in the chat box.
Oh. Did we have one to agree? Oh, yes.
I think it was.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hipsey and Councillor Leach. Oh, no, it was just Councillor Leach. I thought it was Hipsey. Right, so everyone's in favour of that. And we now need to go back to item 7. I'm really sorry.
Item 7, Chair, was a noting report. And
yeah.
So I took it as a given as a noting. So that's why we didn't give a specific vote on that one, because it was a noting report.
Okay. Okay, that's lovely. Is everybody happy that we just noted the fusion report? Right, okay, if we go back to item 9, little b, localities and clusters, their concluding report. Councillor Moody, please.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't presenting this report today. It's the chair of the working group.
Oh, right, Councillor Ratcliffe, I do apologise.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yes, I refer to the localities and cluster concluding report. That is agenda pages 53 to 56, which in itself is self-explanatory. The purpose of the task and finishes group was to either review existing and develop new policies, strategies. Task and finish group recommendations are, in the first instance, considered by the overview and scrutiny function before they are then being presented to either the hub or the full council for approval. We were asked to consider options for future partnerships to support the voluntary and community section across the whole of West Devon. Review the localities officer's role in the council approach to enforcement and tackling environmental crime, promoting efficiencies and building better relationships with the civil enforcement officers to result in improved delivery. Review of community clusters and their effectiveness included election or elected member engagement, business engagement and sport to include COVID-19 guidance, to improve community engagement and support vulnerable residents, to deliver the council's objectives to have a visible presence within the communities, and finally was to review current tasks and roles of the locality engagement officers and the mobility location officers. The localities task and finishes group was set up in October 2020 to undertake a review of local services. This was in light of the council's recovery plan that had emerged following the COVID-19 pandemic. The task and finishes group has sought to develop a clear role and function for the future of locality services. The task and finish group members have set out clear recommendations which will deliver or the emerging corporate priorities and assist elected members with their works within the ward and a visible on-street presence to our communities. An operational delivery plan will be required to support the recommendations set out in this report with clear timescales of implementation. As part of the review and business management, we will consider the structures of the locality services in order to achieve the recommendations set out in the report. The Overview and Securities Committee is asked to consider and propose recommendations as are set out in this report to the Hub Committee for its further consideration. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ratcliffe. It's a very interesting report. I've got one question straight away to Mr. White. Is this something, Darryl, that should be on our work programme? Is it saying that this service has not been reviewed since 2015? Is it something that should go into the work programme?
Well, Chair, the committee itself does receive an annual report from the locality service, you know, sort of every November. So but that's largely an operational report. But of course, it's within the committee's gift looking to next year now when it determines its own work programme, whether it wishes to factor that in again. So it's ultimately a call for the committee when appointed to again annual meeting, Chair. So the first meeting of the new municipal year, it'll be a matter for the committee to determine its own work programme then. But it does, of course, receive the largely operational performance report, I think normally in November each year, Chair.
Yes, yeah. I think it's something if you could just note down for the first meeting after, you know, the start of the municipal year, and, you know, members etc. can decide, whoever would chair or whatever, as to how they take this forward and how inclusive the report is, like, of this element and the operational element, and does it need to be two pieces of separate work every year? So it gives the opportunity to look at that. So thank you very much for that, Councillor Ratcliffe. Did anybody else have any questions, please? Then if we could look at the recommendations, please. There are several here. That the ONS committee recommend to the Hub committee there we are, we're back, in consultation with the portfolio holder, that the one carries out a review of the locality service structure in order to deliver the following: 1.1, EPOs are incorporated into the locality service. 1.2, close working relationships between the localities, parking enforcement and waste teams are formalised. Not sure how that will take place. 1.3, shared officers are introduced to improve the flexibility to meet the team's demands. And 2, drafts a new locality team structure to support recommendation 1, which will ensure 2.1, clearly defined roles that support the delivery of scheduled tasks and the work of community groups, developing service level agreements where necessary, and 2.2, improved officer-based and field support for mobile officers. Do I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. Any questions or debate? Anybody? Okay. Councillor Cheadle, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking to see whether there were any recommendations on cluster. I mean, the title is Localities in Cluster, and we've talked a lot, or the report talks a lot about the role of the localities officers and the relationship between enforcement and localities. But I don't see any recommendations on whether clusters will remain or not. Was there any discussion on that?
Would Councillor Ratcliffe or Sarah Moody like to answer that question, please?
I'm happy to take that, Chair, if Councillor Ratcliffe would like.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, good afternoon, members. Yes, so that was discussed quite at length actually, and what it was deemed is that the clusters were successful in various parts of the borough and not others, so there was no consistency in terms of how they were used, how they were engaged with. So the Task and Finish group decided that we could devise a structure which would allow that flexibility to continue with some elements of the clusters if members felt that it was appropriate for their ward and that level of engagement, but in terms of that structure across the borough, it wasn't deemed appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I would say don't run away just yet, Sarah. Councillor Daniel, you have a question.
Hello. Thank you. I just wanted to ask, how much input was there actually from the localities officers themselves into the recommendations, and are they in support of the changes that you propose?
Yep, happy for me to take that again, Chair?
Yes, please, Sarah.
Yeah, so we've had lots of conversations with our locality officers, and that's why one of the recommendations is around additional support for our operational locality officers. So since 2015, when the service was incepted, it was very much a snap and send service. There was no online resolution, on the ground resolution. It was about feeding back with the issues for the wider council to take that away to try and resolve. And what officers now want on the ground is that autonomy to be able to deal with those issues and resolve it there and then for the customer. And that obviously will then mean that we have less contact to the council. The customer's happy because they get their issue dealt with and resolved very quickly, and the officers feel empowered to be able to do that within our communities. So I think that's a really important point there, that officers actually want this change in terms of that clearly defined role and additional training to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Councillor Kemp, please.
Yes, obviously localities and enforcement is one of those very local resident impactful issues. So will we have more information or different kinds of information that we can spread for our residents about the finance and how it is distributed for local residents or around localities and enforcements and the priorities they have?
Chair, if I don't mind, I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Apologies. If
yes, so is there going to be additional outreach and information for residents? Because if there's any changes, residents are going to come back to us.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Councillor Kemp. And actually, what we want is more presence on the streets, and we want more of that engagement. But by having these what we call clearly defined roles, we should be able to be able to engage with the residents, and particularly the businesses, given the current situation and ongoing future for our local borough and the businesses, that we want to improve that engagement, and that clearly defined roles recommendation should help to deliver that.
Thank you, Sarah.
So how is communications and outreach interlacing with you?
So at the minute, Councillor Kemp, with these recommendations, there isn't a proposed structure, and we'll obviously go away and do that operationally to be able to do that. But like I say, on covering that is the recommendation around them clearly defined roles. So we can certainly look to incorporate that, an element of that.
Mr. Mullen, you would like to come in there, please. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. I would only add to what Mrs. Moody's just said there and say that, you know, we need to think about localities as an additional string into the bow, because members also play an important role in that information dissemination and interaction with the local community. And it's not just relying on the locality officers and the locality service. Members have a key role to play in that as well, in terms of information. And as Councillor Kemp was talking about financial information, I wouldn't expect our localities officers to have financial information about all our services and so on. But that's where members come in with their sort of role as well, in terms of understanding what the council does and communicating that with the residents. It's not just down to the locality service. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mr. Molyneux. Councillor Kemp, has that answered your questions?
My understanding is that this is an ongoing process in that case, which does answer my question. Thank you.
Yes, it is, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Hipsey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to agree with Mr. Molyneux. Certainly, I see members' roles being very importantly disseminating information to our residents. Secondly, just to back up Mrs. Moody's comments, coincidentally, by pure coincidence, my doorbell rang 5 minutes ago and one of the locality's officers was there to deliver my new laptop. And we were discussing this very question. And I can say that the individual concerned was very much in favour of the recommendations that you see before you. So that, you know, that's from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Hipsey. Are there any other questions, please? No? So Councillor, sorry, Mrs. Moody. So I call you Sarah, it's easier. In the head. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for answering the questions of members.
Thank you.
Right, so we have item 10, which is the draft annual work programme, and as you will see, it's got very little on it because we only have one more meeting of this municipal year to go, and we will formulate the new plan in the first meeting. I can't remember if it's May or June. So this is basically for our next meeting. I think the 2 task and finish groups are completed now, aren't they, Mr. White?
That's correct. Yeah, they've both presented their concluding reports today, so we can assume they've now concluded their work.
Yeah. And the Financial Stability Review Group and the Rural Broadband. Mr. Molyneux, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to propose, myself and Mr. White are working up a sort of an annual work programme for next year, and I think it would be really helpful if this committee had sight of that and we had that input into that. It would certainly assist us as officers, and I think it would be good for the future committee that this committee has a view on what that might look like. So I will be bringing forward at the next meeting a proposed draft work programme, and I would welcome members' comments and thoughts on that in the next meeting, if that's okay.
Okay, that's lovely. So I will just add to that once the agenda comes out. Would you rather see it in writing before, Steve, or wait until the meeting?
I'm happy to discuss in the meeting.
Okay, but for some members who can't make it, if they could send in their thoughts to Mr. White, that would be good. Councillor Wood, please.
Hello. Yeah. Just following on from what Drew was saying earlier about the corporate strategy, I wonder if it would be appropriate to ask him to come and tell us a bit more about the corporate strategy and how it's put together at the next ONS meeting, or would that come in somewhere else? And more about how members can get involved with that, what its aims are.
Okay, Councillor Wood. Is Mr. Powell still on the line?
I am, Chair. Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Powell.
Yeah, certainly. I think we'll be setting out the sort of programme for how we're going to be engaging with members shortly, Councillor Wood. So rather than sort of putting that on the programme now, I'd prefer to come forward with the wider programme, get that approved, and then, in that way, we'll make sure we consult with the full membership, if that's okay. But just to be rest assured, everyone will be involved in the development of the strategy.
Okay, all right. I just didn't want it to be sort of presented with a strategy that we hadn't really had any input into or had any awareness of.
No, I mean, that certainly won't be the case. I mean, what I would say is obviously we've done a lot of preparation in the sense of putting together a recovery and renewal plan. So a lot of input from the members in that area. We've got the various strategies, the housing strategy, the climate change and biodiversity strategy we've developed already. So I think we've got a good flavour of the challenges. some of which are changing, and it's a question of how do we put that together into a framework that makes sense, is clear, and obviously we need the public's buy-in to this, the community's buy-in, and obviously the members. So if we set that process out, which will ensure that engagement is with all members.
Okay, all right, then, thank you.
Thank you.
Does that reassure you, Councillor Wood?
It does, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Drew. So with Mr. Molyneux's plans, we will go forward with those and do that. And I think that concludes our meeting. So thank you very much, members, and thank you very much, officers, for your time and input today. And our next meeting is on the 30th.